Morning, everyone. My photograph has a tie on, so I thought I'd put a tie on. But the truth is very different, is that I've got a 7.5-week-year-old baby, and I couldn't find any clean clothes this morning except these. But I've been single for most of my life, until 4 years ago. And so I'm still extremely passionate about this thing about single people. And looking at the theme of making Christian marriage possible is that there's one Christian who meets another Christian. So the first question is, are there any single Christians to meet? Well, we didn't know the answer from the existing data. And last time I addressed this symposium, we'd just done a new survey done by YouGov, socio-demographically balanced, but we hadn't done all the analysis. I've now done the analysis, and I can tell you about the single people that there are not in church. So if I can have the next slide. So we looked at just the people who are going to church. Now we see in every age, and this is very well known, it's recorded in various national surveys, that faith, belief in God and attendance at church are dropping through the age cohort. So on the right are the older age cohorts. I'm using socio-demographic groups, that's 55 plus. And then as you go down to the 16 to 24-year-olds, it's much lower. It's drastic at the people who say they are practicing Christians. As you see, the blue line is those who go to church at least once per month, where the drops are not quite so severe, but they're still happening. So the first thing is that there are fewer single people of younger age in church for other Christians to meet. It's already a problem. It's compounded by if I can have the next slide, by the fact that once over 25 years of age, up to then most people are single, a smaller percentage of society's single people say they are practicing Christians than those who are married. So single people, married people, own to faith and go to church. Single people believe much less as a percentage of those in society. It's not the case that I've heard put forward that because we have an aging church, there are more married people in church because they're older and more likely to be married. Because even in that age group, the single people believe and go to church far less than married people. So church is not for single people, is the perception. It gets worse than that, because those who are practicing their faith and going to church at least once a year, the single people go far less than the married people. So, for example, over 50% of the never married people who are 55 plus go less often than once a year to church, even though they say they're practicing Christians. So the accumulation of all of this means single people is massively underrepresented in our churches. So it's much harder for them to meet each other. YouGov told me after they'd done this survey that they were absolutely amazed at the results. They had no idea the church was so full of married people. Well, you and I know that from our experience. In society, they're not the majority. They're less than 50%. In our churches, over 60% are married. So it's not a surprise our churches start to be geared towards those who are primarily present. But it does mean that those who are single tend to be a little overlooked. YouGov said to me, "Why aren't you making a big fuss about this?" And we said, because it probably isn't news. Let's look at the actual numbers in the church. If we can have the next slide. This slide just says, that the older you get, the less you think that church is a good place for single people. I would have expected the opposite. You've heard me say this before. This is one of the most surprising things to me, that the older you get, the more you've been in church, the more established you feel, the more comfortable you feel. The opposite is the case. The longer you're in church, the less you think it's a good place for single people to be. That's not only for those who have never married, it's not only for the increasing number of, divorced people who are joining the church in the age group 46 to 54, but it's also a lot among the widows and widowers who become quite shocked that all their friends and their married friends they've seen every week, they've done things together every week, suddenly drop them. And they're isolated and lonely at the very point where they need a community. It's not everyone's story, but that's what we hear a lot of in our surveys. If I can go on to the next slide, the numbers. The reds are the married people who practice their faith, and the green are the single people who practice their faith. So this is the actual numbers in society in terms of millions of people who say they're practicing Christians. And you see that if you go in as a single person at particular ages, past the age of 25, you start to feel in the minority, and you start to feel that the church is full of married people. Incidentally, there's only one group in church that is representative of the number in society. Can you guess what that is? No, it's adults with dependent children. We often hear of big drives to get families into church. They're the only percentage-wise representative group in society. We have a massive underrepresentation of single people, and the other is married people who no longer have dependent children, who are yet to have dependent children, or who married slightly later and struggle indeed to have children. But why so many, and I can illustrate this on the next two slides. Can you put that? That's that block there, adults who have largely dependent children. Next slide. And that's representative of the adult of the church. That's the percentage of adults with dependent children. And yet many churches do cater for those, but they're a small number overall. So why so many married? Well, I think there's two things, rhetoric and practice. The rhetoric, and Jason mentioned this, is that people should be married. It's a very strong one given out by the church. But perhaps it's being interpreted that the church is only interested in married people as a result. And that one should be married if you're going to go to church. And so if you're not in that category, perhaps you hesitate, perhaps you don't go, perhaps you think that Christ is not for you. And then you do go to church, you brave it, but then you discover that rhetoric is true. You find it disproportionately full of married people compared to the society you move around. And then you decide it's not for you, and so you don't go. The sparseness of single people particularly is a problem if we want Christian marriage. Until we have single Christians, we're not going to get a lot of single marriage. If we look at the actual data inside the single groups, and if I can have the next slide, please. This is the one you've seen already. This is the numbers. If you go on to the next slide, this is where churches cater generally quite well for, the 20s and 30s. They're a homogenous group, mostly of similar age, never married. Once over that age, if I can have the next slide, even though it's a very large group, you start to get heterogeneity, which is you get divorced people, particularly divorced women coming back into the church, and you start getting widowed people as well as the never married. And one of the reasons that single people can get overlooked, those who are in church, is that they're not as easily identified as single by church leaders. We did a Christian Research Limited survey, if I can have the next slide, and asked, who do you think of as single? And the dark green here on the top lines is those younger who've not yet married, and the mature individuals who have not yet married. And the next three are those who are previously married. And 1/3 of people did agree after prompting that they could be considered as single, all right, but not before prompting. So that means that when you look out, our Christian leaders are looking out at congregations, they do see that they're never married, but they don't see all those who are on their own, who are single parents, divorced or widowed. So that's one explanation for why they're overlooked. And the net result of this, if the next slide please, it's in our churches, when you look out, this is simple diagrammatic representation of 15 people in a church, which you can multiply up any factor you want. The white ones are all married. This is attendance once per year, by the way, and married people attend much more regularly than the others. The purple one at the bottom is living together as married. The three on the top left are never married, and then one divorced and one widowed. That's the average overall. It's 1 in 3 people who are single across all our churches. In your notes, by the way, that you look at, it says 1 in 3 in society. That was an early estimate, and now we have the data. It's actually 40% who are single in society. So it's still 3.25 million people different from our churches to there. So that's why we set up, Jackie and I set up Single Christians. Next slide, please. Because we want to work towards making the church more single-friendly. First, to inspire and encourage single Christians, and secondly, to reach out to single people in the community. In fact, to help meet the objectives in making Christian marriage possible, we need to increase the number of single people in our church and to make Christian singleship possible. Being single-friendly, though, as a church, is not just about being welcoming, but it's about enabling individuals to thrive and flourish. We want happy, fulfilled, excited single Christians who are resilient in life because they make better relationships when they do. All the research shows that happier people marry and stay married. You don't become happier when you get married. Happier people get married. And resilience has a lot to do with this. So we asked them, what do the churches need to do for single Christians to flourish and thrive? And the single people said this. All right, the first thing is no differentiation is made on the basis of marital status. Still, masses of churches don't allow Bible study leaders to be single. They're only married people. They differentiate on youth group leaders sometimes. They have leaders who are mostly married and know good single lives, who are well lived as Christians to act as role models. Events are often family-based and don't involve single people. Second, they practice not only welcome but hospitality. The hospitality is really important to single people. We heard story after story about how when somebody gets a boyfriend, they suddenly start getting invites. How much more did I need that beforehand? They write. As we've also heard, it also presents a true picture of what marriage is like. And the third is a whole long list, but there are other single people there. People need to know that they fit there. There are other people like me here. We need to increase the numbers so that when a single person goes into church, they say, oh, someone's like me, and get rid of this sparseness. The third, are the members of the other sex to meet? Well, I'd like to bring in socio-demographic groups here. We commonly call them middle class and working class, although I always caution that assumptions about character, salary, earning capability, all these things vary widely across both groups. And CVM are really focusing on the ordinary blokes in churches, which is brilliant. And what our data has already been published as part of A-level sociology courses, pointing out how very middle class the church is and how it's really failing the working class people. And they posited a number of reasons for this, which I said they were allowed to do, which I couldn't contradict. But it's interesting, this is now in A-level sociology, and that's what's being taught in our schools about the nature of our church. But however large the lack of working class men is in church, it is matched by the lack of working class women. The numbers are pretty even. They're both very low. That's not true when you look at middle class. Next slide. So, up there in the 21% in the blue is the 21% of middle class women say that they go to church at least once a year, and they are practicing Christians. All the others are 13% who are unpartnered. Right down there, working class men, middle class men. So if you're actually looking at the failure of providing parity between sexes, the problem is in the middle class men. It gets worse than that, because actually there are more middle-class women in society than there are of men. In fact, considerably more. So the net result is, in churches, in the age just 25 to 39, just that age group, there are over 250,000 single women who will not find a Christian husband if you're looking for a man who says they're a practicing Christian. 250,000. Now, if you've been to the Royal Albert Hall, and you can imagine that absolutely full, that is absolutely full. It's not 5 Royal Albert Halls full of women who will never find a Christian husband of that age. It's 50 Royal Albert Halls full. 50. Now, if you include the next age group, 40 to 54, and there are a lot of people looking to marry in that, you can double that figure. It's 100 Royal Albert Hall fulls of women in our society. I want you to pause and think about that. That is the level of the failure of our church. The next 3 points I'm just going to mention: meeting, dating, forming relationships. Annabelle presented the data. We're going to talk about various aspects of meeting, but if you've very, very sparsely got single people spread across all of these churches, then it's really difficult to meet people. And it's a toxic environment within the church if you're trying to do so. So I'm going to jump to my last point, if I can, which you don't need to worry about the slides because there isn't one, which is, what support do we give those who don't want to get married, of which there are a decent percentage, or who are or feel condemned by the lack of men will remain single? And there are different aspects about this. The first is, in the younger age groups, that people, as Jason mentioned, really start worrying that God doesn't have a plan for their lives because he hasn't provided a husband or a wife. And partly this is this societal thing that everyone should be partnered, whether that's a sex partner, cohabiting partner, or a marriage. but partly it's our church's teaching still about passivity in this particular area of life. Many distinguish between the activities that you need to do to find a partner and the activities you do to find a job, choose where you live, or any of the other major life decisions. And I always argue for some sort of integrity across those and consistency. But we're not at the moment preaching that kind of theologically. The older groups have largely come to terms with plans for life, but not with the lack of community in church. The church continues to signal the importance of biological heirs, which I don't want to diminish in any way whatsoever because it's really critical. But we read in the scriptures about the new community, the community of faith, which is about spiritual heirs. There's a disjunction between what we read in scripture and what we practice. And it's hard to see how single people can increase in number in our church, thrive and flourish, and then get married if we don't address the fundamental nature of what the church bears witness to. We go into church, we get signalled the importance of weddings, parents, mothers, fathers, babies, children, young people. It's all about biological heirs. It's good, it's important. But where is our witness to spiritual heirs? Where's our witness to communities of faith, love, as Jason again is saying, witnessing to Christ, where actually it doesn't matter what our marital status actually is, through our love for one another, which is evident to the others? How can we develop and signal spiritual heirs is one of the questions we're starting to work on. Now, friendship is one, been mentioned already. Hospitality, shared living, intimacy, all of these things are critical. Another is God-parenting. Do you know, we ask for godparents in baptisms in many of our churches, or adult mentors and things like this, and then we dump them. There's nothing, no events, no courses, nothing to invite them to. All right? And yet a lot of single people, especially single women, are godparents. I'm godparents, and many people do. Because, we don't have children and they look around for that often. Parents. I would have been a much better godparent if there had been some training, some support, an annual event that all the godparents were called to and things like this. Mentors in churches could take the same role. I'm also pleased to see more churches starting to look what households of faith look like through developing either a family-based or a group-based or an individual rule of faith, to use a monastic term. Being Christian, in other words, how does this household, even if I'm on my own or sharing with other people if you're young, how does it look Christian? We need to start getting very practical about some of these things, about how we develop the spiritual air of the church as well. I introduced mentoring into one of the churches I was into, and one of the biggest problems we have, in my discovering my own personal mentoring, and other people may want to comment on this, is that most Christians knew very well what to say no to, but they never knew what to say yes to. They would pursue and tell me all about the things they weren't allowed to do, couldn't do, didn't have time to do, but they could never know what they said yes to. I think becoming a transformed community of faith is about what we say yes to, not about what we say no to. And so we want to start transforming our churches. So in summary, let's make Christian singleship possible, and let's have wonderful churches that are actually communities of faith with spiritual heirs as well as biological. Thank you very much for listening.